Over the summer, I was doing a playlist of the top draft picks at a certain draft spot. So, certain players at a certain spot in the draft. And I thought today, it's Friday, it's kind of a lazy afternoon. The games start at 4. So, before the games get started, why not jump in? So, I looked through my little notebook here. And I found that the overall number 3 draft picks, I went through, I had it all mapped out. I can't find that I ever did that video. So what I've done is I've looked at the list as I had it then, and I've said, you know what? This is a fine list. It's a great list. It's not a perfect list. So I changed it a little bit. So since July, my opinion has changed. So let's go ahead and get into number 15. Bob Carpenter, who was drafted by the Washington Capitals in 1981. Carpenter was not a huge star player at any point in his career. Very good forward, played for Boston temporarily, and I was a big fan of his play. Good player. And again, you know, at number 3 draft picks as opposed to numbers 2 and 1, you're not going to get all the superstars, but you're going to get some pretty good guys, and he was a good workhorse for a number of teams that he played for. He played for quite a while. Number 14. $30 years later, there we go. Jonathan Huberdeau is drafted by the Florida Panthers at number 3. So 2011. I know. I'm writing up. I know. I don't normally write live on the board anymore, and that's why, because I tend to do this. Anyways, Huberdeau at number 14. He has really emerged this year. Now, based on his stats up until last year, I actually didn't have him on the board when I originally came up with these top 15 picks back in July. But as of now, I will definitely have him on the board. Number 13. I got to try to straighten this out. Let me just go ahead and... It's going to require some squishing. 2009. 2009, Matt Duchene of the Colorado Avalanche. Of course, he's now an Ottawa Senator, and they're trying to keep him long term. Duchene's never quite got to his ceiling. When you look at the way he's playing with Ottawa this year, that's kind of where we expect him to play every year, and yet he hasn't quite been that good. So, for Duchene, if he can keep this up, if he can play every year the way he's playing right now in a contract year, got to be careful when a guy's in a contract year, because the next year they can look at Alex Semin as a good example. They can just drop right off the map. Number 12. People know who Mike Foligno is because, of course, his kids are doing quite well in the NHL. What's not as well known is that Mike Foligno was actually drafted by Detroit. He is known more for what he did in Buffalo and then Toronto, but he was drafted by the Detroit Red Wings. And he was considered a part of their sort of youth movement with guys like Danny Gare. And then, of course, because it was Detroit and they had ADD at the time, they abandoned it almost as quickly as they started it. He ends up in Buffalo. I believe he went with Gare. And, yeah, that was the end of that youth movement in Detroit. Boy, that was quick. But Foligno went on to a pretty solid career. Now, if we're looking at overall offensive potential, obviously you'd have Huberdeau above Foligno. But if I'm looking at their careers until now, so I'm looking at how much a person's accomplished in their career, I have Foligno ahead of both Duchene and Huberdeau. Number 11, I'm going to make another change from where I had things this summer. You guys have no idea if that means this guy's gone up or gone down. For all you know, Olli Jokinen has had an amazing season, and he's actually gone up. Olli Jokinen's number 11 out of LA, and he looked like a bust early. And I've got a video on the channel about him where I describe him as a journeyman. I know there were people who didn't like me describing him as a journeyman, but he moved around a lot, and he was kind of a player who was seen as a bust. Then he became a really solid offensive player, and then later on in his career, he accepted whatever role he was given with the team. So for me, Jokinen carved out a pretty solid career for himself. I still label him as sort of a journeyman more than a star player, but a pretty solid career for him. Number 10. I have a funny feeling if I revisit this list a couple years from now, Leon Draisaitl is going to be higher than this. Edmonton, 2014. Leon Draisaitl has been dynamite with McDavid. Now, ideally, if you're the Edmonton Oilers, you want him to be dynamite on his own line. So you have McDavid, Draisaitl, and Nugent Hopkins. That would be the ultimate situation for Edmonton, where you can roll three lines, those three centers, and a team can't really stop Edmonton's attack because there's so many different lines that can hurt you. As it stands, Draisaitl's carved out a solid career for himself. He's having a really good year this year. Could hit 100 points. Outside shot at that anyways. And, you know, in his own right, he's been pretty solid. I look at Draisaitl next to McDavid, and if we're going to be using Edmonton comparison, it's like a Gretzky-Curry kind of thing. Although Curry was a right winger specifically, and Draisaitl ideally should be a center. But it sort of reminds me of that same sort of a dynamic. And of course, over the years, Curry and Gretzky became the most feared in the NHL. Draisaitl and McDavid has that potential as well. And I think it's going to be more of a longevity thing if they leave them together for years and years to come. Eventually, we'll look back and go, what a great duo those two were. Number 9. I was kind of torn on this one, but I don't think that me leaving him at 9 is going to bother anybody. Eddie Olczyk, who's known now more as an announcer to the younger set. Eddie Olczyk was a pretty darn solid player in his own right, and he talks a lot about his playing days as an announcer, and rightfully so. He had a very solid career. Olczyk, never really a superstar. I'm trying to think if he played in all-star games, but he was a solid goal scorer. He was a solid player. Good top 6 guy for most of his career. And honestly, when I was making up this list, I couldn't see any way not to have him on it. Number 8. Now we're going to go back to before I was born with this one. And this one kind of, well, it stings. Even though I wasn't around, obviously, when this draft took place. Reggie Leach was drafted by the Boston Bruins in 1970. Now, of course, Leach wouldn't win anything with the Boston Bruins. He would do that with the Flyers. And trading Reggie Leach is one of the top boneheaded moves that they made. Boston made a few. And Reggie Leach being traded is for me, one of the all-time boneheaded moves by the Boston Bruins. Fantastic player. When I came into watching hockey, he was on the downside of his career. But I've seen enough and heard enough over the years about Reggie Leach through different documentaries, through different videos, and from other players when they talk about players from that era to know that Reggie Leach at least belongs at number 8 on this list. Number 7. This guy's still active. You would not know it because he's been out all year. And I was torn on this one too. I remember when I made up this list, I was kind of torn because Marian Gaborik, early in his career, one of the most dynamic forwards in the league. One of the fastest, most dynamic, very feared goal scorer. And I say that as a Canuck fan, that Gaborik was the one I was terrified of when we played against the Minnesota Wild. They didn't really have a lot of goal scorers, but Gaborik was kind of sort of fantastic. Now, Gaborik's play over the last few years has, I think, taken some of that luster off. I don't think he gets viewed as being... He's definitely not a guy who's going to go into the Hall of Fame. We'll go that far. But I think some of his star status has been lost with his recent seasons. He makes a lot of money. People know that. They know his contract isn't very good. They know that the Kings traded that contract to the Senators in part to try to get some cap flexibility going on there. But, of course, the Phaneuf contract went the other way, so but, yeah, Gaborik, for me, based on his younger years and what he's done previously before he started having injury issues, I still would have him at number 7. Number 6. Remember back in 1990, all the talk was about Lindros. And then very quickly, all the talk was about Jágr. And Jágr, rightfully so. Jágr was just crazy out of his mind great. Primo was seen as a bust. Primo was seen as a bust early on. And there was a lot of talk about how Detroit made a big mistake drafting Primo, and how this Ricci kid looked better, and Jágr looked better. But I mean, Jágr, it's not fair to make the comparison. But there was a lot of talk early on in Keith Primeau's career about how he was a bust. But as we would find out, being a power forward, being a bigger player, it just took him longer to get into it. This is why when I see rookies this year that aren't necessarily producing very much, I don't say a lot about it, because honestly, sometimes the guy who's great in that rookie year doesn't last as long as the guy who slogs through those fourth line minutes, puts up maybe 5 goals on the season, and is being labeled as a bust right out of the gate. Primeau ended up becoming one of the best power forwards I saw, and really, really, really key guy. Pretty darn solid hands too. Early in his career, it didn't look like that was going to happen. It looked like busts, and it's not how it turned out. Number 5. This was tough for me, but I had to weigh a lot of factors with this. So for me, Henrik Sedin comes in at number 5. I had Henrik Sedin at different points at 4 on this list, and then I just couldn't do it. I had to put him at 5. Henrik Sedin, he and Daniel, the face of the Canucks franchise for the better part of a decade plus, and he had the weight of the city on his shoulders, and you never would have known it when you watched him play or if you saw him in interviews. Always a nice guy. Anybody I know, any Canuck fans I know that have approached either of the Sedins in public and hey, can I get a picture? I've never heard of anything off-putting about them. They're really great guys. And Henrik on the ice, puts up over 1,000 points, rewrites the Canucks record books when it comes to assists and points, and probably, for my money, the all-time greatest Canuck. I know there's people who are going to say Bure. I know there are people that feel that way, and I understand it. But for me, Sedin, number 5, I think that works. If they won the Stanley Cup in 2011, he's higher than 5. But I have to be fair with this. Number 4. This was tough too. So Chicago shows up on the list again with Jonathan Toews, who was drafted in 2006. And for people who are wondering why I'm wearing a Minnesota North Stars jersey, it's because I can. The Minnesota Wild are on the board. The Minnesota North Stars don't have a top draft pick on this board. It's not there. So for me, Toews, even though over the last couple of years we can look at his contract and say, he's probably overpaid for what he does now. Last season he had a down year. This year he's been kind of up again, but Chicago's been kind of down as a team. It's really kind of easy to pick on him, but when you look at his track record and you look at the 3 Stanley Cup rings, I couldn't justify having Toews any lower than 4. He has been pretty fantastic overall. So there you go. Jonathan Toews, number 4 on the list. Number 3. Back in 1983, the New York Islanders, with the number 3 draft pick, choose Pat LaFontaine. He hits the NHL, and at the time, it looks like the Islanders were on their way down, but LaFontaine and Flatley both came in. And I thought, if the Islanders have a dynasty go out, and another dynasty comes in with this LaFontaine kid, and with Flatley at his side, I might lose it. Now, the Islanders never got to a dynasty with LaFontaine. No team did that LaFontaine played for. But no team was denied a dynasty because they drafted LaFontaine or because they traded for him. LaFontaine, one of the best players I saw, who sadly his career was ended early, I felt, due to injury. But still, some fantastic statistics put up by this guy. Really, really solid goal scorer. He scored, of course, the heartbreaker for the Washington Capitals. In 1987, was a four overtime game, I think it was. I want to say 5, but I'm pretty sure it was 4 overtime game, where you see Mason's in the net, LaFontaine takes the shot, and Mason just slumps. He knows it went behind him, he knows it went in the net. The Islanders move on to the next round, the Capitals go home, and my first heartbreak cheering for the Washington Capitals occurs, and it's because of Pat LaFontaine, and yet, I wasn't mad at him, I was just mad at the Islanders. Number 2. So back in 1980, the Montreal Canadiens did something funny. They had the number 1 draft pick because that's what Montreal did. See, teams didn't see the number 1 draft pick being as important back then. So Montreal just gets the number 1 draft pick like they did with Guy Lafleur. And the thinking was, hey, Montreal's got a number 1 draft pick. This Denny Savard kid out of the QMJHL, pretty good player. They didn't draft him. They drafted Doug Wickenheiser, which meant that Denny Savard drops to Chicago, who run up to get him. I'm sure that they were shocked that Wickenheiser went first, and they got Savard at second. So for 1980, that was a watershed moment for the Chicago Blackhawks. Ultimately, the team ends up on the board twice here. Eddie Olczyk in 84, Savard in 1980. 3 times, because you got Toews in 2006. But Olczyk and Savard are from the same era, where the Blackhawks weren't quite good and they weren't quite bad for a lot of that either. But Savard was an absolute joy to watch. The Savardian spinorama. He went around defensemen and he made it look easy. And you'd watch him and you'd think, why don't other players try that? And then you'd see when other players would try to do that kind of thing and it wouldn't work and the puck would fly off into the corner kind of thing. Savard was a special talent. Absolutely. Franchise player. One of the greats. And he won a Stanley Cup in 93 with Montreal, I believe. Yeah. Because Montreal trades for him and they trade out Chelios, which in hindsight was a bad trade. Montreal makes trades that you look at in hindsight and say, that was a bad trade, and then they end up winning a cup. Like the Rod Langway deal. Well, they traded out Langway. Langway became a big star with Washington, and then they won a cup in 86. So bad trades don't necessarily mean no cups. So Mark Bergevin, there's still hope. Maybe this spring Montreal goes on a run and everybody loses their minds as Montreal hoists the cup a 25th time. Number 1. People are going to know where this is going. The Toronto Maple Leafs. Way back when. Way back when. Traded a first-round draft pick they didn't think was a big deal. Believe it was to get Tom Kurvers. Tom Kurvers was a defenseman who may not have met his goaltender all year. And the end result was that number 1 draft pick going to New Jersey became Scott Niedermayer. Hall of Famer, multiple-time Stanley Cup winner, New Jersey, and then in Anaheim. One of the best, most dynamic offensive defensemen I ever saw. And I've said before, if Niedermayer spends his whole career playing for an organization that encouraged the pure offense, Niedermayer probably would have put up 1,000 points. He was so offensively gifted. Playing in New Jersey, he respected the style that was there, and he played within it, and it limited his offense somewhat. But he's still one of the all-time great defensemen. He's in the Hall, and in Anaheim, he was kind of unstoppable. So there you go. Honorable mentions: Don Lever, Dumont, Braddock Bonk, that's J.P. Dumont, Glenn Wesley, Jay Bouwmeester, and Don Lever. I have Don Lever down there twice. Interesting. All right, so there you go. The number 3 draft picks of all time. These are the 15 greats in my eyes. If there's somebody more recent you're thinking of, you're in luck. I plan to revisit this not every year, but probably every couple of years. But I have to go with guys based on their career to this point, and that's why Huberdeau barely gets in there, even though, 5 years from now I could see Huberdeau being as high as 11th on this list or 12th, depending on what Duchene does, that kind of thing. So it changes, but there you go. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. As always, don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through. You just happened upon this video. Thank you guys so much for watching. I'll talk to you again soon.